Hello, you're back with Dave and Tim at the Single Malt Review as we return to the hallowed grounds of Scotland for some Scotch single malt.
Yeah, we do, and hallowed ground indeed, because this is the end of a story that's been going on for more than a decade now, and it really is something pretty special. Let me explain. This is, as you can see, Glenglassaugh, or maybe you can't. What's different about this one is it's got a 12 on the bottle, and that's one of the most exciting 12s. I promise, one of the most exciting 12s in the world of whiskey right now, because Glenglassaugh has been, it was the original, probably not the original highly popularised, we're starting this distillery again. We are rebooting it, going back to square one, and making new spirit, laying it down, and by goodness, that was 12 years ago. That was 13 years ago now, because this was bottled in late last year. But yeah, Glenglassaugh, which is, in addition to everything else, one of the absolute top tier, hard mode, excruciating, how do we say this word phonetically, Scotch written words. And so hats off to that one. I have heard everything over the years. Glenglassaugh, I think, was my favourite one. But yeah, a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. But what isn't a nightmare is the whiskey. Dave, why don't you start cracking in there while I ramble off my notes off camera here. Glenglassaugh, people will remember in the part of the trio of distilleries that made up Billy Walker's first conquest of Scotland in sort of Billy Walker's ambition of the territories, which is ongoing to this day and has reached the shores of Glenallachie. But back in the day, his first movement was to purchase Benriach and then start the Benriach Distilling Company. Glendronach followed, two really good gets there, and then they took a punt on this other closed distillery, which was Glenglassaugh, way up north, and it must be right on the border of Speyside because it's in Port Soy, and it must be a block or so to the west. It would be is Speyside country, so I guess they missed out on that by a few metres. The distillery had been closed after the whisky crash, like so many others, in 1986, as I glance at my notes. And it's been the usual pass the parcel of ownership right up until then. It had a really brief stint in 2008 when it was bought by a company that I don't think exists anymore. And I'm going to have to lean here. The Scant it sounds Scandinavian, but they've been wiped off the internet. I could not find them. They farted around with the dreaded spirit drinks. They released a bunch of old stock, which did fantastically well, won all the awards the years that were released, but they shot that shot, and there was not much left after they dumped all of their 30 and 40-year-old whiskey out there. And the new stuff, they wasted a lot of it by releasing, if not completely unaged, 50%, what do they call it, the whiskey that shall not be named, not the one you're thinking of, not the extremely naughty, probably Glen, I'm in the Glen hole now. Oh no, Glenfarclas, of course. Unaged whiskey vodka awfulness that they made, and the other one that had a 6-month rest in oak as if it was bloody tequila, and oh no, you think of how much good malt went down the drain. So that went on for a bit of time before Billy Walker came in and cleaned up the act there, only to then sell the whole lot to Brown-Forman 3 years later. And so Brown-Forman, it remains. But they've obviously been doing something right, because here we are, it's still there, trucking along, 12 years old, and as we're about to discover, it's pretty jolly good.
Many years ago we reviewed Glenglassaugh Revival, which was one of the first proper single malts out of a distillery after its, revival.
Yeah, and I thought for what that was, no age statement, very, very young whiskey, I thought that was perfectly good. I thought it was really quite a good innings for that one. They did Torfa as well, which is their peated one, and I thought that was a bit like it didn't really want the peat, and the peat didn't really want to be there. I don't know, but that was sort of an experiment. They do a lightly peated version of this one, but this one of the ones I tried was my favourite, which is why I bought it.
So this fella is 45% ABV, matured in bourbon, sherry, and red wine casks.
Yep.
Always happy to see a wine cask. So I'm looking forward to giving this one a go.
As for which red wine, I'm not sure. I'm sure the information's out there, but not within my brain. And otherwise, I believe it is uncoloured, unchill filtered, but we'll give that a scientific test later on. And the only other note here is that they make a big ado, as a lot of other remote coastal whiskies do, as to the maritime character here. I don't think I can taste one bit of maritime anything on here, but we'll see. We'll do the science and see if you collect anything, because there's plenty to love about this one. But yeah, coastal aspect, I don't know. But either way, at its core, it's a very classic, and the Speyside mode I would have called it, which is a shame that it couldn't call itself a Speyside. But we've got, first and foremost, we've got that lovely clover honey, and we've got white fruits galore.
I'm getting overwhelmingly florals, actually. Lots of honeysuckle, lots of this is probably the first time I've given a nosing note, but pollen. I have chronic allergic rhinitis. I get terrible hay fever every spring, summer, and into autumn. It sucks, but it means that I am very sensitive to the smell of pollen. This smells like the fresh pollen off a gorse bush or a kowhai tree, if you're familiar with New Zealand flora. And if not, well, it's not the flowers themselves, but just the actual smell of the pollen itself.
I'm trying to think of, I've encountered those pollen supplement tablets you can buy, but I forget if they had a smell or if they didn't. But anyway, your gorse bush is a good one. Wind bushes, as they're called back in the old country. They have a particular sort of baking shortbread, gentle, floral coming into, buttery baking, which is a very, very odd thing for a flower to smell like. Yet they do, though it's very, very subtle scent. There's a heap of that on here. Right, on the palate, full strength. 45, which is kind of an odd one, but better than 40.
Ooh. It's positively fizzing off my tongue, borderline effervescent. There's actually a small measure of heat as well, some peppery spice, a bit of a kick.
There is a kick.
Yeah.
The youth here is not brazen because it's not young whiskey.
No,
but there's quite a lot of
it's a bit behaving like a young one. Though.
It's got a bit of a boot in it, and I think not that it's a problem, but the cause of that is that 12-year-old it may be, but 12-year-old is the ceiling. There is no older whiskey than that, so there is no ability to top dress on this one, and also no ability to fill in at the bottom, because then it would no longer be 12 years old.
Yeah.
So they're in a very, very narrow spot. There's probably only one, quite thin plane on the stratigraphy of Glenglassaugh's maturing
Unless there's
stock.
any of that very old Glenglassaugh mixed in.
There will be some of that left, but
assume that by and large, actually 12-year-old whiskey through and through. Yeah.
So it's 12-year-old, but it's only 12-year-old, not 12-year-old with a bit of sneaky 18 to round off the edges like that. Wow. And so I think that's why we're getting a little bit more youth than we would otherwise expect.
There's also a bit of a sort of a sparkle you get from heavily wine cask influenced whiskies, in my experience. What are you tasting?
I'm getting quite a lot of pepper, fruity black pepper. At full strength anyway, and it's possibly because the bottle's been sitting down at this low end because we were drinking and I thought, oh crap, we haven't actually looked at this one. We should leave it alone. So it's had plenty of time to breathe now, and there's quite a smoky char on the end, which I wasn't getting originally. I thought it was a pretty cut and dry sweet experience whiskey, almost 100% Speyside. But no, there is something, and it's still not maritime, but there's something a little bit closer. There's a bit of charcoal, a bit of smoke.
It's just a touch of sort of a salted caramel with like a bit of a caramel sweetness, but just a little bite on the end. Yeah. Now, I poured such a small pour, but there's not really enough left to add water to, so I am going to top up slightly. Oh.
So I think a little bit of water helps it, dries it out a little, because I think in its raw form, unless you're into a very, very sweet whiskey, it is a little bit too sweet right up the front. It could use a little bit more of a the drying out of the putting water in gives it a bit more of an elegance, a bit more poise to the middle of the palate, which I think does it a bit better, and it brings out the savoury notes a bit further into the spotlight. And if anything, it makes that peat more evident. I'm really quite surprised about that peat. It was really hiding it until that bottle got low, but now it seems
it's just a touch
like it should have been more evident.
Like a croissant with sea salt flaked on top of it.
Yeah, maybe that's the maritime character. Maybe it's that salt is all
salt and butter.
Is all you get. Is all you get. It's just absorbed a little bit from the nearby ocean.
It is. Yeah, that's a nice bit of subtlety compared to the overtness of the heat and the spice which came up first.
Yeah,
I like that. It's full of contrasts, but not clashes.
Well, it is quite literally an evolving whiskey, and that this is the very, very first iteration. It could have been called 12, but it's an evolving whiskey in that it is quite changeable in the glass. It is. a whiskey that takes a little bit of time to make up its mind. And that makes it a bit of a curly one to taste, but bear with us. Yeah, I think it is just that salt. That salt is, as long as you consider a grain of salt enough to give it the maritime tick, then I suppose that's enough. But otherwise, it is a conspicuously youthful, if that's your sort of thing, whiskey with plenty of sort of sweet, bustling Speyside flavours, and then, that little bit of nuance on the end. I think I would like a little bit more of the more austere flavours that we're getting right on the end. I think this makes a better dry whiskey than it does a sweet whiskey. I'm trying to think back about the old, because I have tried old Glenglassaugh, but in such, and by which I mean pre-closure Glenglassaugh, but only in independent bottles, because it didn't really see the light of day in an independent release. It went into, goodness, Cutty Sark and Famous Grouse, and one other one. Oh, and Lang's. Lang's was the other one. But clearly not in recent history. They must have had to go with supplement with something else. And is it going back in now? Probably not. Probably too valuable as a single, but I guess that's our gain and Famous Grass's loss. But never mind, it's good for it. But yeah, scores. This is, I don't know. This is going to be one of these really, it hits you different whiskies. So mileage may really vary drinker to drinker here, but this is an 85 for me. I think it is on the path to a really good whiskey. I don't think it's quite there yet. I think another 2 years. But still 12 years old, with that bit of extra headroom to just round off the edges and assemble things in a bit more of a delicate perspective. I think it'll be really, really getting somewhere.
So it's good now and a portent of even better things to come.
Certainly.
Yeah. It's 87 points for me. It is satisfying right now. It does things that are different for a 12-year-old whiskey. And again, it's just a welcome return to older age statement whiskey. A good milestone on Glenglassaugh's
it is
like Renaissance.
It is important. 12 years old might seem like a pretty prescriptive number in Scotch whiskey, and it is. But though that may be where the big boys like your Glenfiddich begin, when you're starting from square one, when you are starting from the very bottom of the mountain, that's a colossal
the sheer
thing to
amount
look up
of
at.
effort, of investment and resource and basically will it would take to produce something.
That's basically like
in these economic climes that
staring
we find
up
ourselves
at the summit of Mount Everest and going, ooh, and imagining bleeding money for 12 years, which sounds, I don't think that would happen these days. That sounds like economic suicide in the current climate. But back then, in more hopeful times, 2008, then we lived in a more hopeful age
for the global financial crisis.
Yes, I suppose it would have been. So good on Billy Walker there for scooping this one out of the fire and giving us a whole new distillery. And the fact that they've gotten all this way is something. It really is something. One can only hope that all the new startups go on a similar journey and do not fall off halfway up.
Yes.
I fear a few of them going to have to, just because of the economic realities. But this as a model, I think is a great show of hope.
And especially just bringing wine casks to the fore again. Rachel Barry has blended a masterpiece here, and it'll be even better, I'm sure, when there is, more time and more old whiskey going on top.
Yeah. So, no, lovely stuff. Cheers to Billy Walker for starting it off, and cheers for Brown Foreman to holding on to it, keeping grasp of the football while it's got all this way to 12 years old. And many returns for Glenglassaugh, and see this as a sign of a hopeful future for all of those struggling with whiskey programs that are maybe hitting their 6th year, and they're going, oh my goodness, the money. It's there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to kind of stick in there. Anyway, bit of a longer one, but plenty to talk about. So, Slandra, and we'll be back with something a little bit more established.